Atlas had never broken formation. Not once. Not during crowded base ceremonies. Not during long Veterans Day marches. Not even when children waved flags inches from the curb and brass bands shook the pavement with every note. But on that clear November morning in Beaufort, North Carolina, as the parade turned onto Main Street beneath a row of snapping American flags, the German shepherd stopped. 1 second, he was moving beside Caleb Rowe with perfect discipline, sable coat brushed clean, canine collar polished, amber eyes forward. The next, his paws froze on the asphalt. Caleb felt the change through the leash before he saw it. A stillness. A decision. The Marine formation continued half a step before Caleb raised his hand and stopped with him. Behind them, boots clicked once, then fell silent in a ripple of confusion. The drums kept going for 2 beats too long. Then even they seemed to soften. Caleb, a white United States Marine with close-cut light brown hair and a calm face shaped by years of duty, looked down at Atlas. "Forward," he said quietly. The command was gentle, nearly swallowed by the sound of flags cracking in the coastal wind. Atlas did not move. He was not staring at the marching route, not at the band, not at the applauding veterans seated under a red, white, and blue awning. His head had turned toward the crowd barrier on the right side of the street, where families stood shoulder to shoulder beneath storefront windows decorated with paper poppies and gold stars. Caleb followed his gaze. At first, he saw what everyone saw. Children in navy jackets. Parents holding coffee cups. A little girl waving a flag too large for her hand. An older man in a service cap with his palm resting over his heart. Then Caleb saw the boy. He was small, maybe 8 years old, standing very still beside a woman in a dark blue dress. He wore a white button-down shirt tucked neatly into tan pants, and both arms were wrapped around a small glass display case. Inside it was a folded American flag, tight and triangular, with a tarnished metal tag resting against the glass. The boy was not waving. He was not smiling. He was looking straight at Atlas. His lower lip trembled once. Then tears spilled down his face before anyone around him understood why. A murmur moved through the crowd. Caleb heard a parade officer behind him take a step closer, heard the quiet urgency in the man's breath, the unspoken order to return the K-9 to formation. Caleb knew the rules. Ceremonies mattered. Formation mattered. Every step was meant to honor those who had served. But Atlas had not looked away from the boy. Slowly, without pulling, the dog took 1 step toward the curb. Then another. Not disobedient. Not excited. Careful. Reverent. Caleb loosened the leash and followed, because there are moments when discipline is not broken by mercy. It is completed by it. Caleb followed Atlas toward the curb with the slow care of a man walking through a chapel. The parade around them did not stop all at once. It softened in layers. First, the boots behind Caleb lost their rhythm. Then the brass section lowered just enough for the melody to become a hum. Then the clapping along Main Street faded into a hush that moved from storefront to storefront like a breeze. Atlas reached the crowd barrier and sat down in front of the boy with the glass case. He did not jump. He did not bark. He only lowered his head until his eyes were level with the child's hands, his ears relaxed, his breathing calm and steady. Caleb stopped beside him, keeping the leash loose. The boy's mother placed one hand on her son's shoulder, but she did not pull him back. Her eyes were wet already, though she seemed to be trying very hard not to let the morning break her open in front of strangers. The boy looked from Atlas to Caleb, then down at the folded flag inside the case. His voice came out small, almost hidden beneath the flutter of flags overhead. He stopped like Dad's dog used to. Caleb felt the words settle somewhere deep and quiet. He had heard many things during ceremonies. Speeches, names, applause, the solemn crackle of microphones. But that sentence carried more weight than all of them. "What was your dad's dog's name?" Caleb asked softly. The boy swallowed, holding the case tighter against his chest. "Ranger." At the name, Atlas's nose moved once toward the glass. Not eager, not playful, searching. Caleb saw the tarnished metal tag more clearly now. It was not a dog tag worn by a Marine. It was an old K-9 collar tag, scratched around the edges, the letters worn but still visible in the slant of morning light. "Ranger." The mother closed her eyes for half a second. "My husband was a Marine K-9 handler," she said. "Our son was only 3 when he passed. Most of what he knows comes from pictures, stories, and that tag." Her hand trembled slightly on the boy's shoulder. "We brought it today because this was the first parade he asked to attend." Caleb looked back at Atlas. The German shepherd remained perfectly still, as if the name had called him to a duty older than the parade itself. Caleb knew scent could live in leather, metal, cloth, and memory longer than people expected. He knew dogs could read what humans carried without understanding the story attached to it. But this felt different from a simple recognition. Atlas was not following a smell. He was honoring it. A parade officer had come close now, his expression caught between protocol and something softer. He opened his mouth, then seemed to think better of it. No one told Caleb to move. The boy wiped his face with the back of one hand, embarrassed by his tears. Atlas lowered himself from sitting to a gentle crouch, making his large frame smaller, safer, patient. Caleb crouched too. "What is your name, son?" he asked. "Eli," the boy whispered. Caleb nodded. "Eli, Atlas is not here to scare you." Eli looked at the dog. "I know." Then, after a long breath, he asked the question that silenced even the wind between the flags. "Does he remember my dad?" Caleb looked at the old tag in the case, at the folded flag, at the mother holding herself together with one hand on her child and the other pressed against her heart. He could not promise what only God and dogs might know, so he chose the truest kindness he had. "Maybe," Caleb said quietly, "he remembers what love smells like." Eli stared at Caleb for a long moment, as if those words had opened a door he was afraid to step through. The crowd stayed quiet around them. Somewhere down Main Street, the parade band held a low note that faded into the soft clink of flagpole ropes and the distant cry of gulls from the Beaufort waterfront. Atlas remained crouched at the curb, his amber eyes calm, his sable fur catching the bright November sun. Eli looked at the glass case in his arms and slowly tilted it forward, careful with it, as though he were carrying something alive. The folded flag did not move. The old collar tag inside slid just enough for the worn metal to touch the glass with a tiny sound. Atlas's nose lifted. He leaned closer, then stopped on his own, waiting. That restraint did something to Eli. His shoulders loosened. "Ranger used to sit like that in pictures," the boy said, voice still trembling but clearer now. His mother nodded, tears resting on her lashes. "Your father trained him to wait for permission." Caleb looked at Atlas and felt the quiet ache of recognition. "So was this one," he said. Eli glanced up at him. "Did my dad teach him?" Caleb did not answer too quickly. He had learned that children could hear the shape of a lie even when the words sounded gentle. "Maybe not with his own hands," Caleb said. "But sometimes good training travels farther than the person who started it." The mother reached into her purse with unsteady fingers and pulled out a small photograph protected in a clear sleeve. She handed it to Caleb. In the picture, a younger Marine stood beside a dark-coated K9 in front of a training yard, both facing the camera with the same composed stillness Atlas held now. The Marine's smile was modest, almost shy. The dog beside him sat tall, proud, and patient. On the back, in faded ink, someone had written, "Daniel and Ranger, last certification day." Caleb felt the name before he spoke it. Daniel, Eli's father. He looked from the photograph to Atlas, and for a breath the years between the image and the street seemed to fold together. The old tag, the flag, the boy's grief, the dog's sudden stop, all of it had gathered into this one small place at the edge of a parade route. Atlas lifted one paw and placed it gently on the curb, close to the glass case, but not touching it. Eli let out a quiet sound, half laugh, half sob. "That is what Ranger did," he whispered. "Mom, that is what he did in the picture." His mother covered her mouth, unable to speak. Caleb looked again. In the photograph, Ranger's paw rested on the edge of a wooden platform beside Daniel's boot. Not dramatic, not trained for applause, just a quiet pose of loyalty. Caleb understood then that Atlas had not broken formation for attention. He had recognized a shape of sorrow, a scent of old leather and metal, and maybe a posture passed down through years of K9 work like a prayer with no words. The parade officer removed his cap. A few veterans in the front row did the same. No one commanded them. They simply knew the street had become sacred for a moment. Eli lifted one hand from the glass and reached toward Atlas. He stopped an inch away, waiting the way Atlas had waited. Caleb nodded. "You can touch him." Eli placed his small palm between Atlas's ears. The German shepherd closed his eyes. Eli's hand stayed on Atlas's head, as if he had found a living bridge between the boy he was and the father he was still trying to know. The dog did not move. His eyes remained closed, his breathing slow beneath the noise of a parade that had forgotten how to continue. Caleb stayed crouched beside them, one knee on the warm asphalt, one hand resting lightly on the loose leash. He could feel the street watching, not with impatience anymore, with reverence. The boy's mother knelt beside Eli and held the glass case between them. "Your dad used to say Ranger could tell when someone was carrying a heavy heart," she whispered. He would sit down and wait until they were ready to stand again. Eli looked at Atlas, his fingers sinking softly into the fur between the shepherd's ears. "Is that why he stopped?" Caleb let the question settle. Sunlight moved over the folded flag, touching the blue field and white stars behind the glass. The old collar tag caught one bright spark and threw it across Atlas's muzzle. "I think," Caleb said. Atlas knew this was not just another place in the crowd. The mother unfolded the photograph again and held it where Eli could see. Daniel and Ranger, a Marine and his K9. Two figures frozen in a younger morning, unaware that years later a son would stand on Main Street searching for the sound of a memory. Eli studied the picture, then glanced at Atlas's paw resting near the curb. "He sits the same," he said. His mother nodded, unable to hide her tears now. "Yes, sweetheart." The parade officer stood a few feet away, cap still in his hands. Behind him, the Marine formation waited without complaint, their boots aligned, their faces solemn. A drummer at the front lowered his sticks. A trumpet player pressed his instrument against his chest instead of his mouth. No one had ordered silence, but silence had chosen them. Caleb looked back once at the line of Marines, then at the boy, and understood that sometimes honor was not found in keeping perfect pace. Sometimes honor meant recognizing when grief had stepped into the road and needed room to breathe. Eli lifted the glass case slightly. "Can he see Ranger's tag?" he asked. Caleb looked at Atlas. The dog opened his eyes, calm and steady. "Let him smell it from there," Caleb said. "He will know what to do." Eli tilted the case just enough. Atlas leaned forward until his nose hovered close to the glass. He breathed in once, slowly, deeply. Then he did something so small that only those nearest could see it. He lowered his head until his forehead nearly touched the edge of the case, the way a dog lowers himself beside someone who is hurting. Eli's face crumpled, but this time the tears did not look lost. They looked released. His mother wrapped one arm around him, and together they held the flag and the old tag between them while Atlas stayed bowed before it. Caleb felt his own throat tighten. He had seen medals pinned, flags folded, speeches delivered beneath bright skies. But this quiet moment at the curb, felt like the kind of ceremony no one could schedule. A little boy had brought his father's memory to a parade. A dog had found it in the crowd. And for a few sacred seconds, Main Street did not move on without him. The moment Atlas bowed before the glass case, the street seemed to understand what words could not explain. A woman near the bakery pressed a hand to her mouth. An older veteran in a navy blazer lowered his eyes. A child who had been waving a small flag let it rest against his shoulder, suddenly quiet without knowing why. Caleb stayed beside Atlas, feeling the leash hang loose between his fingers, no longer a tool of control, but a symbol of trust. The parade officer stepped closer, not to correct him, but to stand near the edge of the moment with his cap held against his chest. "Take your time," he said softly. Caleb nodded once. Eli looked up at the officer as if surprised the world was allowing him this much space. His mother brushed a tear from his cheek with her thumb. "Your father would have liked this dog," she whispered. Eli looked back at Atlas. "Do you think Ranger would have liked him too?" Caleb allowed the smallest smile. "I think Ranger would have respected him." That answer seemed to matter. Eli straightened a little, still holding the case, but no longer clutching it as if it might disappear. Atlas lifted his head and looked directly at the boy, calm and steady, the way working dogs look when they are waiting for the next true thing. The old collar tag gleamed behind the glass. Caleb noticed faint scratches along its edge, tiny marks from years of use, from doors brushed past, training fields crossed, mornings started before sunrise. It was only metal, but it had carried a life. It had carried a partnership. It had carried enough love for another dog to find it years later in a crowd. Eli's mother opened the case just a few inches, careful and reverent, not removing the flag, only letting the air touch the tag. Atlas leaned forward, breathed once, and then sat tall. His posture changed so clearly that the front row saw it. Chest lifted, ears forward, head high, not alert for danger, present for honor. Caleb felt the hair rise along the back of his neck. In the photograph, Ranger sat the same way beside Daniel. Eli saw it too. His lips parted. "Mom," he whispered, "he is saying hello." His mother closed her eyes, and a tear slipped free. Caleb could not prove what Atlas remembered. He could not explain how scent, training, grief, and grace had braided together in the middle of Main Street. But he knew what he was seeing. A child had asked for a sign without knowing he had asked. A dog had answered without knowing he had answered. Caleb slowly stood. His uniform shifted in the breeze. He faced the glass case, the folded flag, the old collar tag, and the boy holding them. Then he raised his hand in a Marine salute. One by one, the Marines behind him followed. The parade officer did too. Then the veterans under the awning. For several seconds, there was no music, no cheering, only flags moving overhead and Atlas sitting perfectly still before a memory that had finally been seen. Eli did not stop missing his father in that moment, but he stopped carrying the missing alone. When Caleb lowered his salute, the Marines behind him lowered theirs in the same quiet rhythm, and the street remained still for one extra breath, as if no one wanted to be the first to let the moment end. Eli stood a little straighter beside his mother, the glass case held carefully against his chest, his eyes no longer searching the crowd for something missing. Atlas stayed seated in front of him, calm and solemn, the November sun tracing a warm line along his sable shoulders. Then the parade officer gave a small nod toward Caleb, not as an order, but as permission for the morning to continue without losing what had just happened. Caleb crouched once more and looked at Eli. "Your father trained good loyalty into the world," he said. "Sometimes it finds its way back." Eli wiped his face with his sleeve and nodded, trying to be brave in the way children do when their hearts are too full. His mother touched the old collar tag inside the case with one finger, then closed the glass gently. "Thank you," she said to Caleb, but her eyes moved to Atlas. "Both of you." Caleb did not know what to say to that, because gratitude like hers felt too sacred for ordinary answers. He simply rested his hand on Atlas's back. "He heard something I missed." Atlas rose then, slow and controlled, and stepped closer to Eli. The boy looked at Caleb for permission. Caleb nodded. Eli reached out and touched Atlas's working collar. Not the polished metal, not the official markings, but the worn edge where daily duty had softened the material. "Bye, Atlas," he whispered. The German shepherd leaned forward just enough for his nose to brush the boy's sleeve. It was brief, gentle, almost nothing, but Eli smiled through the last of his tears. The band leader lifted his baton down the street. The first drumbeat returned, softer than before, respectful now, like it had learned the shape of the silence it was entering. Caleb guided Atlas back toward the formation. No one in the line looked annoyed. Hayes, standing 2 places behind, had his jaw tight and his eyes bright. An older Marine near the front gave Atlas the smallest nod, the kind men in uniform give when words would lessen the truth. Caleb and Atlas stepped back into place. The formation adjusted around them without complaint, closing the gap as if it had always known they would return. When the parade began moving again, the pace was slower. Not officially, not announced, but everyone felt it. The boots struck the pavement with a softer weight. The flags overhead snapped in the wind, and the crowd watched with a different kind of attention. As Caleb passed Eli one last time, the boy lifted the glass case slightly, not high, just enough for Atlas to see. Atlas did not break formation again. He only turned his eyes for a heartbeat, then faced forward. The message had been received. The duty had been done. And somewhere between the music, the sunlight, and the hush that still lingered on Main Street, Caleb understood that some salutes are not planned into ceremonies. They arrive on 4 paws, stop where a heart is breaking, and remind everyone that remembrance is not about never stepping out of line. Sometimes remembrance is knowing exactly when to stop. The parade moved again, but it no longer felt like the same parade. Before Atlas had stopped, Main Street had been filled with sound. Drums, brass, applause, children laughing, the steady rhythm of boots on pavement. Now every sound seemed to carry more meaning. The snare drum tapped like a measured heartbeat. The flags cracked overhead like pages turning in a book of names. Veterans along the curb stood a little straighter, and families held their small flags closer, as if everyone had been reminded that remembrance was not a performance. It was a promise. Caleb kept his eyes forward, one hand holding the leash with relaxed control, the other swinging in time with the formation. Atlas walked beside him exactly as he had been trained, shoulder aligned with Caleb's leg, head level, ears forward. To anyone who had arrived late, the German shepherd would have looked like the picture of discipline. Only those who had seen him stop knew the truth. He had not failed the formation. He had found the reason for it. As they passed the town hall, a group of schoolchildren stood behind a rope line, paper poppies pinned to their jackets. One little girl lowered her flag when Atlas passed, then lifted it again with careful respect. Caleb noticed without turning his head. He also noticed the parade officer walking farther ahead, no longer tense, his cap back on, his shoulders softer than before. The band changed songs near the courthouse, easing into a slower patriotic hymn that seemed to settle over the street like warm light. Caleb felt the melody move through him, touching places he usually kept locked. He thought about Daniel, a Marine he had never met, and Ranger, a K9 whose old collar tag had carried enough history to stop another dog in the middle of a crowded street. He thought about Eli, standing beside his mother with a folded flag held close, no longer swallowed by the crowd. And he thought about Atlas, who could not know ceremony the way humans knew it, yet understood loyalty in a language older than words. Near the end of Main Street, the parade route widened beside the waterfront. The Beaufort harbor shimmered under the late morning sun, fishing boats rocking gently against their lines, gulls circling above the docks. The smell of salt water mixed with kettle corn, coffee, and fresh-cut grass from the courthouse lawn. Caleb allowed himself one glance toward the crowd. Eli was there again, having moved with his mother to the final viewing area. The boy stood upright now, the glass case held against his chest, the old photograph tucked safely under one arm. When Atlas came into view, Eli did not cry. He smiled. Small, trembling, real. Atlas's ears flicked once, but he did not turn out of line. Caleb saw the restraint and understood it as another kind of mercy. The first stop had been for recognition. This one was for strength. As the formation passed, Eli raised 2 fingers to his brow in a child's version of a salute. Caleb's throat tightened, but his face remained calm. He returned the salute with his eyes only, and Atlas walked on beside him, steady as a prayer that had found its way home. The parade ended near the waterfront with the band holding its final note beneath the bright Carolina sky. Applause rose slowly this time, not loud at first, but warm, spreading from the courthouse lawn to the harbor rail, from families in folding chairs to veterans standing with their caps over their hearts. Caleb remained in formation until the last command was given, and only then did he let his shoulders ease. Atlas sat at his side, patient and composed, his sable coat gleaming where the sun touched it, his eyes still scanning the crowd with that quiet intelligence Caleb had learned never to dismiss. Around them, Marines shook hands with townspeople, children posed for pictures, and flags fluttered from lampposts in the salt breeze. Yet Caleb's attention kept drifting back toward the corner where Eli and his mother stood apart from the moving crowd. They were not isolated anymore. People gave them room, but not distance. An older veteran spoke gently to Eli's mother. A woman from the bakery handed Eli a cup of water. The parade officer returned the photograph of Daniel and Ranger to the boy with both hands, as if passing something sacred. Caleb watched Eli place the photograph carefully against the glass case, beside the folded flag and the old collar tag. The boy seemed smaller than the objects he carried, and yet he held them differently now, not like a burden, like an inheritance. Atlas stood before Caleb gave any command. He did not pull. He only looked once toward Eli, then back at Caleb. A question. Caleb understood. All right, he murmured. One more goodbye. They crossed the open stretch of pavement slowly, past chalk drawings on the sidewalk and red, white, and blue streamers tied to the railings. Eli saw them coming and stepped forward. This time, he did not cry. He knelt carefully, setting the glass case on a folded blanket his mother placed on the ground. I wanted to show you something, he said to Atlas, though his voice was really meant for everyone who loved someone they could not bring back. He opened the photograph sleeve and pointed to Ranger's collar. Mom says this tag was his favorite because Dad said it made him official. Caleb smiled softly. Dogs do not need tags to know their duty. Eli looked at Atlas. But people need reminders. Caleb felt that sentence land harder than the boy could have known. Atlas lowered his head and allowed Eli to rest his forehead gently against his. The mother turned away for a moment, pressing her fingers to her lips, not to hide grief, but to steady gratitude. Caleb stood beside them, the harbor wind lifting the edge of his uniform sleeve. He thought about all the times he had believed healing had to arrive like a victory, clear and complete. But here it was, arriving as a boy breathing easier beside a dog, as a mother standing, without having to explain her tears, as a street full of strangers learning to pause. When Eli finally stood, he looked taller somehow. Not older, just less alone. By late afternoon, Main Street had begun to empty, leaving behind folded chairs, paper flags, and the soft echo of music that seemed to linger between the storefronts. Caleb walked Atlas back toward the staging area and near the waterfront, where the marine vehicles waited under the shade of live oaks. The harbor behind them glittered in the sun, calm and silver, as if the whole town had exhaled. Atlas moved at Caleb's side with his usual discipline, but every few steps, people paused to watch him with a different kind of respect. Not because he was impressive, because he had been gentle. Eli and his mother stood near the curb one last time, the glass case held safely between them. The boy raised his hand, not quite a wave, not quite a salute, something in between. Atlas saw him. This time, the German shepherd did not leave Caleb's side. He simply stopped for one breath, lifted his head, and looked at Eli with the calm steadiness of a promise kept. Eli smiled. It was small, but it reached his eyes. Caleb placed his hand on Atlas's shoulders and felt the warmth of the dog through the polished coat. For years, Caleb had believed ceremony meant precision. Straight lines, measured steps, clean commands, no breaks in formation. That afternoon had taught him something quieter. Honor was not always perfect movement. Sometimes honor was the courage to pause when a hidden sorrow stepped into the street. Sometimes it was a dog lowering his head before a folded flag. Sometimes it was a child learning that memory could hurt and heal at the same time. The parade officer approached and handed Caleb the photograph of Daniel and Ranger for a final look before Eli's mother tucked it away. Caleb studied it once more. The Marine, the K9, the old collar tag, the same patient posture Atlas had carried into the crowd. He gave it back with both hands. "He would be proud of your son," Caleb said. Eli's mother nodded, unable to answer for a moment. Then she looked at Atlas. "And proud of him, too." Caleb glanced down. Atlas was looking toward the street now, where the last flags moved in the wind. The mission was over, yet he still seemed to listen. Maybe that was what made him different. He did not wait for pain to become loud. He found it while it was still quiet. Caleb opened the rear door of the vehicle, and Atlas stepped in without hesitation. Before Caleb closed it, Eli called softly from the curb. "Thank you, Atlas." The dog turned his head, ears lifting once. Then he settled inside, calm as evening. Caleb closed the door gently. As the vehicle rolled away from Main Street, the town returned to its ordinary sounds. Gulls, tires on pavement, a bell above a bakery door. But for everyone who had stood there that morning, the parade would never be remembered as the day a K9 broke formation. It would be remembered as the day a German shepherd knew exactly where honor needed to stop.